Okay, today almost everybody found the film that we saw last time, the Inconvenient Truth, and I've looked at a lot of people wrote long comments here and there, really good. And almost everybody thought he deserved the Nobel Prize. And, somebody said that maybe there should be a new prize just given particularly for people who work on behalf of the environment, a sort of Nobel Environmental Prize. And that's a good idea too. But someone reminded us that Al Gore is a politician, and also as someone who advocates green, green initiatives in business, and in that sense is also very much, has his own, say, political and even economic interest in mind. And of course, so, and maybe, the film does kind of put him into sort of a hero, maybe too much. So there's some exaggeration there. And also, the Nobel Prize is a very good prize, but it often gets manipulated by politics. Do you think Obama deserves the Nobel Peace Prize? And maybe at that time, but even at that time, people say, well, why are they giving it to him? He hasn't done anything yet. He just got elected. And now, if you look at what's happening in Washington, and Obama is just announced a bill to Congress allowing the United States to open up war in Syria and Iran against the ISIS. And so it's does he deserve a Peace Prize? I don't think he'd get it now. So you have to, it's good to keep a little skeptical mind. So on the one hand, I'm glad you all enjoyed it, but also look at both sides of the issue as well. Some good comments are here also about political will. I think you like that thing, it's a renewable resource, and lots of comments about that. One person said, oh, well, it's not just political will, it's will in general that's important. Do you know the phrase? It's again, I gave you the phrase like mother is in, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. Well, how about where there is a will, there is a way? Does that translate into Japanese a lot? Where there is a will, there is a way. Okay. Takako, do you know the Japanese for that? Ishi areba michi ari. Well, that's a good one. So I think, and that also means that in terms of environmental issues, a lot depends not so much on letting other people do it for you, but kind of collective will. We have to get involved. But that involvement, and I think probably, I think somebody in one of the comment sheets noted that almost throughout the course, one of the themes is raising awareness, getting people to be active and do things. And that's that whole issue of will. So that came through in the comment sheets a lot. We're coming to the end of the course, Today is, let me just, I wanted to also say about the film 8 years ago. Have things gotten worse since 8 years ago? Actually, yes. But not in all areas, and perhaps not as Al Gore or his scientists predicted. Things are not as, the ice mat, I looked at there's the sea levels, global sea levels. We can all look up there, is the sea level rising? Well, there's strong evidence it's rising and it's going to continue to rise. There's all this sort of issues, as well as the question of Greenland. Greenland, bad news for Florida. Greenland melt underestimated. Greenland's ice melt continues see this to be maybe too sunny, but other people say could Greenland's shifts could spell. You know, there's that whole Greenland ice melt. It's continuing on. In fact, it says here on the very first one here, this is from January of this year, that the melt is well above average for 2014, tying for 7th, the highest extent in 35 years, satellite record. And it said that really the big year was in 2012, a record melt for all areas. 2013, somewhat cooler. Well, there's some kind of fluctuations here and there, but maybe, you know, Gore's exaggerated the speed, but certainly not what's actually happening over the long term. And, you know, fairly soon, that whole so-called Northwest Passage, where you can go by boat all through the Arctic region, say between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. It's now possible if you have, you know, some special boats, but it's actually, that is not in too distant future as a possibility because of the ice melt up there as well. So those are continuing, but yes, you know, you can check on that. A number of people say, I wonder how his predictions back in 2007 are holding up. That data is available. Okay, now let's go back to what we're doing here. We're getting toward the end of the course. Today is about bicycling, the history of bicycles, and also a little bit recycling. And I asked you to read this article that I wrote on bicyclism and recycling, and I'm going to talk about that in the class today. Next week, we're going into the Great East Japan earthquake, tsunami, and radiation disaster. And I'm hoping that this is a type of review. It seems like, you know, it's 3 years ago, but actually it's next month, it's and 2 months from now, it's going to be 4 years. And there's a whole question of it. Is it in people's minds? Of course, it's sort of faded a little bit away. Let's talk about it. Let's review it. What's happened, and then what's being done. So there's some readings here, like this one you don't have to, it's a documentary film, 43 minutes. I'm only going to show in the class next time just a real small bit. But what's worse, the problem of the cure. These are some readings I'd like you to do. But one thing you might just simply do if you don't have time for everything is just look at the Wikipedia article as a sort of review. Just what happened? What's the, you know, when did it happen? What happened? What's this? What are the casualties? This, you know, the tsunami, the earthquake, the tsunami, the radiation thing. Just get the facts. Kind of the basic information is there. And then there's some other issues here about, you know, why is it so slow? But those are the things we're going to talk about on the 16th. We've all lived through this. It's a sort of, you know, it's fresh in our memory, but it needs a little bit of, you know, context and thinking about it. Japan and the world environment. We'll talk about, you know, what's Japan doing? Japan's sort of environmental policy. Maybe the connection between Abenomics and the environment is the sort of issue that we might try to raise and think about. Is Japan doing enough? And then the discussion class on the last class on the 23rd, are we learning from the past? This is a course about history. So does it, you know, are we learning? Is our you know, learning about not only the last couple hundred years, but maybe the last 2,000 or 3,000 years? What have we learned? Has it helped us? Let's hope it does. But basically, review what you've learned in the class, and then, and then answer the question, are we learning from the past? And I put the assignment here. We've touched on various environmental issues, especially in the last 200 years. We've studied the birth and development of environmentalism. This sort of, okay. And then, but so far, despite the good works of people like Al Gore and others in Japan, around the world, the results are, it still hasn't slowed down. The carbon dioxide emissions continue to grow. Why? Why? What? That should be why. What have we not? Why have we not been able to learn from the past? Or to phrase the question differently, what have we learned from the past? That should be a why. I'll change it. Choose at least one area in local, national, global environmental history. This is the assignment. Could be, could be here at ICU, could be Japan, could be the world. Describe the problem, what people are doing about it, what progress is being or not being made. Try to explain why you think the problem is so difficult to solve. A number of your problems said, yes, where's with will we could do it, but in fact it's, people aren't solving it. Why do you think it's so difficult? It may be easiest to select a current environmental issue. We started off our class looking at the newspaper. I hope you're still reading the newspaper. What's in the news today about the environment, but you don't have to be limited to the present, okay? And the style guides in here. Okay, so this kind of gives you a free sort of something that you might be particularly interested in yourself rather than everybody has the same sort of topic. And that's that. Okay, I'm playing with words. Bicycling and recycling. And there's the symbol of the recycle sign, and here's the bicycle sign. And there is a company called Ecochari, which is, do you know what they do? Ever heard of that company? They dispose of abandoned bikes. Hochi jitensha o shobun suru. But not only shobun, they try to recycle old bikes too, and give them a new life. So, the history doesn't always repeat itself. Well, let me just say, let's just say the word recycle and bicycle, it sounds nice, but what's the connection between bicycles and recycling? Or what's the connection between bicycles and the environment? どうですか? Right, let's start at the beginning. And I'll go in. You've read some things. I'm going to go in a little bit. I want to get some of your ideas at the beginning before we go into the lecture part. What do you think it's going to be about? What's the connection between bicycles and the environment? Just off the top of your head. Hi?
It's friendly to the environment.
It's friendly? How come?
It doesn't use any energy.
It doesn't pollute. Yeah. It's actually, you can use your own energy. It's you don't have to use gasoline or electricity, but you can just go with your own power. You have to have some food and water, I guess. Okay, and so, and you can go places without using any CO2 emissions. Okay, that's good, isn't it? Especially if lots of people do it, rather than using cars. Even using buses, it's better. But it's only kind of short. You can't go too far with it because it takes a long time. How fast can you go on a bike? How many kilometers an hour? 15, 20. Yeah, 20 if you don't go on the sidewalks like that. Okay, get on the roads if you're going that fast. Okay, how fast can you walk? Just walking? 4 kilometers an hour. That's a pretty fast walk. I walk at 5.6 kilometers an hour. Wow. Because I walk up to Musasakai a lot. Yeah, and you have a little walk meter, and you can tell you how fast you're going. It's not bad. But you have to kind of walk fast. And basically it's 3 kilometers to the station from here. And so I can get there basically less than 30 minutes, maybe 25, 26 minutes. Sometimes it's even quicker than going to the bus and waiting. The bus. So anyway, bicycle will go, but bicycle is quicker. How long did it go to the station by bike? 10 minutes, 15, 10 minutes, 12 minutes? Yeah. Be careful though. You know, when you're going on the bicycle, if you go on the small roads, and you see the signs there that says "Aisyu se konaide," you know, don't come in here, students. Why is that? Why are there some signs that don't ride your bike here if you're an ICU student?
Because ICU students tend to go on a line, go like in a row.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's very dangerous for people who are walking there.
Right, yeah, and the residents there, the Juming, are really, because and it may not be only ICU students there, there's some high school students, there are other students, but basically they think it's ICU students who are causing the problem. Making noise, driving dangerously, going too fast, going reckless, and kujo denwa. Telephones come into the university all the time. You're a student, do something. Okay, so be careful when you do go, but don't speed but there is a nice bicycle path on Kaide-dori, right? Okay, ride your bike safely. So that's one area of bicycle being environmentally friendly. But what ways do you think it's not environmentally friendly? You read the story?
No, but from using a bicycle and watching friends use bicycles, I feel that bicycles are short-lived.
Short-lived, yeah.
And they tend to be thrown away easily.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're left, like in a parking lot, for example, the police take it away and people never claim it back.
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever done that? It happens a lot, doesn't it? And you have to, and if you leave it, because it's hochi jitensha, so that's what I'm going to talk about too. And that is actually what's often called bicycle pollution, jitensha kogai. So I want to talk about that issue. So kind of the two sides of bicycles. But let me start with recycling. Do you all recycle? Are you good recyclers? When you finish with this, doshimasu ka? Take the cap off.
Take off the wrapping.
Take off the wrapping. Oh, sokomade yaru. Okay. And?
The wrapping goes in inflammable. The bottle goes to the bottle part and plastic caps. There's like another container for plastic caps.
Everybody do that all the time? Sometimes, some of you are, but not many of you, maybe you don't do it as carefully, but you'll put, when it says, the burnables and non-burnables, daita wakeru ne. You don't just put everything in one thing. In the United States, that's how you do. You just put everything in one thing. But in Japan, most people follow the laws fairly carefully. And if you live in your house, you recycle garbage. Today in ICU was paper. And so it's newspapers and various other type of shredded paper, and maybe some old books and some furugi, goes out. But the next day was going to be some like a namagomi. Another day might be moenai gomi, and then there's a day for pura. And actually, some communities have all sorts of categories. So, do desu ka? In your house, how many categories? Do you know? Does your house, where you're living, do you know have different categories? Some have 4 or 5 categories. Some have even like 15 categories of different types of gomi. In the dorm? Is it very careful? How about the ICU dorms? Are they really careful about the recycling? Maybe not so careful? Uh-huh. Anybody else live in a dorm? No, is it? Way back there, you answered the other. Is it careful? Are you a good recycler in the dorm?
They have like an environmental committee.
Uh-huh.
Deals with like all gomi stuff.
Uh-huh.
It's like pretty strict rules. And they have
pretty strict. Good. And how about in your house, in your home?
California now.
Oh, in California. Different story, isn't it? Anybody living in Japan?
Oh, I just want to add on.
Yeah.
Even though I see students like separate the trash,
Uh-huh.
I heard that Mitaka puts it all together.
What?
Actually, it's true. Not all of it together, but some of it, because their incinerator isn't. They want to make sure that they're trying to get people. They're trying to train people, and it's not yet perfect. Sometimes other types of garbage gets in. Yeah, so it's more. I think right now in Mitaka, it's more on the psychological training stage, trying to get people to do things properly. They have a nice new incinerator. Have you seen it? Mitaka incinerator, up by the shakusho. Big, tall entotsu. In Japan, most of the particularly the moeru gomi. But I think in Japan, in Mitaka, the PET bottles and the pura is put aside. Yeah, that's separate and recycled. But some other garbage does get mixed up and gets incinerated. Yeah, so it's not perfect, but I'd say that in Japan people are pretty careful. But that's only fairly recent. I wanted to, again, draw our attention to history. Edo period, pretty good. But around the 1950s and 60s, pretty bad. Not only was there like Minamata and other places like that, but even household garbage was not very strictly controlled. And it really is only from the 1980s and then into the 1990s where very tough laws come that household garbage and our personal garbage is much more strictly supervised and controlled, both by government and by local and city government, as well as by our individual will. And it was built into us now. We've learned it. It's part of our. It's part of our, our thinking. But that isn't always the case. Remember, on your papers, I often say, be sure to put down dates, kind of historical context. Japan in the 1970s and the 1980s are quite different. And then the 1990s is different again. So it kind of, keep good sense. Do you know this term called a sound material cycle society? What is that in Nihongo? Junkaku, Junkan Shakai. Okay. And it kind of has this sort of reduce, reuse, recycle, and it gets sort of cycled around. Well, this idea, this is, the Japanese Ministry of Environment. This is a sort of a goal, but this was sort of the goal from the 1990s. This type of system is basically what we're dealing with today. And one way the government not only passed the laws, but also tried to make us think, recycle, know your 3 R's. It's sort of probably in education from shogakko, the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. And it starts to become part of our thinking. But that's part of, a policy from the 1990s. And one way that the government has tried to sort of make it sort of atarimai for us to do this very neatly was use of history. And it reminded people of the Edo period, that there was a sort of recycling in the Edo period of people who will, grow food, rice and vegetables, comes to the urban areas, food and vegetables, and then the koyashi, basically the waste. It gets used as fertilizer and goes in this type of a circle. And so they said, well, remember back in the Edo period, ware Nihonjin, we were very good at recycling, let's do it again. And some people used, and there was sort of like in the 1880s a type of Edo boom, lots of books. Edo Jidai wa Eko Jidai. And kind of saying, this is really, and so these books became quite popular. Practically, this particular author, Ishikawa Eisuke, made several, probably he became very rich, selling books, all saying the same thing about, showing that the wisdom of the people now, and that we need now in our age, basically the 21st century, let's go back to the way, this kind of joshiki of the wisdom. And he particularly stressed this term here, which has become sort of the symbol of Japanese eco-awareness, that mottainai. And this is, again, supposed to come out of Edo period. Recycle it, don't throw it away, mottainai yakara. And kind of strengthened a sort of consciousness of being environmentally friendly, environmentally as promoting sustainable activities and so forth. And they also here, even look at here, Japanese Ministry of Environment using hokusai, kind of reviving him from the 1830s and bringing him up to the 21st century, and then telling us what to do with our garbage. When it comes to being eco-friendly, the Edo era had many systems from which modern society can learn. Well, it's a type of, on the one hand it's true, but it's a type of propaganda. It's a type of way to kind of get people to kind of because in between, it wasn't just simply Edo period and everybody gets better and better all along. There's actually a period in the 1950s and 60s and 70s where there's a lot of indiscriminate waste, throwing garbage away, not mixing it up, and people throwing things on their steppoi, all of that. There's a time in when Japan was more of a throwaway society rather than a recycling society. So now let's just take a little review of Japanese history. And I want to also just say here, Meiji period, Westernization. 1868. Remember this picture I showed it before, Bunmei Kaika? Here's all the people with their Western clothes and their jinriksha here and basha there and the brick buildings and they're kind of redoing Japan from after the Meiji Restoration. The part of the goals of the Meiji Restoration was to strengthen Japan's, well, on the one hand, becoming like a Western country, but the goal for Bunmei Kaika, Western, was not so much let's become like the West, but also let's strengthen ourselves so that the Western countries don't take over us. It's a sort of almost like fight fire with fire type of thing. So that the policies of the Meiji government encouraged industrialization and encouraged the development of the Japanese military. Fukoku Kyohei, remember those words, we talked about them? And we also saw that in the Meiji period, one of the big areas of development were strategic industries, particularly in mining, metals, ammunition, shipbuilding, things that will help make Japan really strong. And remember what happened. As a result of some of those, strategic industries like the copper mine, we saw examples of a lot of environmental damage. Did we say that Japan became, started to destroy its environment only after the coming of the West? Maybe it speeded up, but it wasn't necessarily. So, the Edo period had a lot of recycling, but it also had a lot of manipulation of the environment for human needs. So it wasn't so much that, but certainly speeded it up. And remember him, Furukawa Ichibe, the owner of this mine, one of the 12 great men of Meiji. We kind of look at him as a, look what he did to the environment now. But at that time, and even now, if we look back a little bit more critically, we can see two sides to him, right? And he was one of the people who helped Japan industrialize and not become a colony. I mean, Japan, by 1900, Japan was a great economic and a great military power, ranking alongside countries like England, France, the United States, Germany, Japan, maybe the fifth great power of the world by 1900. There were times in the pre-war period where there's a lot of encouragement of industry, particularly encouragement of strategic industries, almost all throughout. But there's also a lot of encouragement of people to put down their own self-interests and think of the nation. What was that word about zeitaku? And what was that one? That thing we mentioned it before. That don't have any luxuries, don't have any self-concern until we win. Katsumade.
勝つまで、欲しがりません、勝つまで。
Yeah, don't have any desires. Put that. And remember, we talked about these words like oyake and watakushi. And even before the Edo period, there was a lot of, it was really, don't think about yourself. In fact, there's a phrase called meshi hoko. Do you know that word? Darika, can you write it? That looks good. So. And okay, good. Arigato. Thanks. What's it mean? Meshi. Push down your private desires and serve the public. Kuni no tame, ie no tame, ta no tame, not for yourself. Okay? And those ideas continue into the modern period. Even especially during the years of Japan's military rule, 1930s, Showa Shokki. And Japan is kind of trying to get the whole country, trying to unite everybody, if you can imagine your heart beating, ichioku isshin. The whole world, the whole country is like beating their heart together. And that's where they say, don't have any desires, until we win. And they have all these signs here, zeitaku wa teki desu yo. These sort of, so there was a lot of concern about kind of hold back your stuff, but there was also lots of, on the other hand, work and strengthen the country, and military industries are going, and it's actually during this time in the 1930s that many of the industries, such as Chisso, are going full blast and without any regard for the environment. And so it's a sort of on the one hand, encouraging people to be frugal, but then encouraging the industries to put out as much product as possible without any worry about maybe even not only sacrifice of its, you might even see this as a period where there's lots of enforced labor, very little control over the quality of labor in terms of, so this is the 1930s. Now, what happens after the war? After the war, Japan is also growing very rapidly. That sort of post-war rebuilding Tokyo, rebuilding other 60 cities, and trying to restore Japan's economy. And in a sense, this sort of this also continues in the 1950s. Don't think of yourself. Think of rebuild Japan. Kuni no tame. That sort of mentality is even in the 1950s. Government policy. Rebuild Japan, rebuild its industries, its environment, and so even in that time, again, companies like that, Chiso Corporation and other people are just full speed, but also very little regulation of the environment. And then, so you see, for much of the 20th century, both before and after the Second World War, the government encouraged production through the indiscriminate use of resources. The legislation was not tough, and it was demanding individual sacrifices for the good of the country, for wealth and power. So it starts, though, things start to change in the 1960s. And especially after 1960 is the kind of Ampo Toso, there's a big, and then the new prime minister, Ikeda Hayato, becomes, and then he has a very different policy. If you study Japanese history, the difference between the Kishi Naikaku, which was much more more, let's build up Japan's military economic strength, and the Ikeda Naikaku of the early 1960s saying, let's spread the wealth out. And he had this, Keizai, the economic doubling plan. And it's going, and people's standard of living starts to change in the 1960s. But what also happens in the 1960s, as people's standard of living and their wealth, their wages go up, and their their consumption goes up. Also, their garbage goes up. And Japan starts to have, from the 1960s, a problem that is still very persistent, is what to do with garbage, gomi mondai, and with increasing levels of gomi. What can you do with it? All of this gomi. And can you use it to, and much of that was put into the bay. Where to put all the garbage? It starts from the 1960s and 70s. You can maybe, before you could probably treat it locally, but then Tokyo is growing big. It's our population, especially after the war, increases. What to do with all the garbage? Well, one way to do the umitate, to kind of make some islands, like Dream Island, Yume no Shima, and just throw it in there. But it's no longer really an option now, is it? Almost all the available space in the bay has been sort of taken up. There's probably not, the people can't see adding more garbage to the sand. But in fact, if just in the post-war period, all of this is, look what happened here. Oh, these are all new lands around Tokyo, even Tokyo Disneyland. All of this is, that's all garbage. So, well, is that? And then, once you can't dispose it so easily, just by putting it in the bay, then there's to say, well, then how else can we get rid of it? Well, let's burn it and have entotsu and do lots of incineration of garbage. So that way, and actually, I think somebody in one of your papers mentioned some. Did anybody study about the number of chimneys in Japan doing for garbage burning as opposed to some other countries? Somebody wrote a paper that had that figure, and it was surprising. It seems like the number of chimneys in Japan is like 3 or 4 times greater than, say, the United States or some other countries, even with a much smaller population. Japan really is sort of entotsu no okoku for garbage, local incinerators, including, you might want to look at Mitaka's new incinerator chimney right next to its shakusho. It's a sort of showcase one. Okay. So what do you do with the garbage? Is incineration the answer? But that had black smoke, that had, especially if you have indiscriminate burning, and you mentioned that maybe even Mitaka is still not really clearly keeping a clear division between, say, plastics and paper. When you burn plastics, you're going to put in some dioxins, some various things in the air that you don't want. So incineration wasn't the better problem. So then from the 1980s, how to make sure people's garbage gets separated in different categories, and then start the idea of, let's have so-called, at the beginning it was simply burnable garbage and non-burnable, moeru gomi, moenai gomi. And the recycling programs that you're involved in today, taking the cap off and taking this, they didn't exist. You know, around your street, maybe so-called chirigami kokan, a little truck came. Have you ever seen chirigami kokan? Mo nai kana? Anybody? Have you seen one? Yeah. Still in Mitaka? Little truck comes around. It used to always come here, even on the campus. This is 1970s, and drove around and says, you know, it's in this chirigami kokan, and you say, hai hai kite kudasai ne, and you give him some used newspapers and some old papers, and he gives you toilet paper. And kokan shimasu yo. And so you get nice new, very terrible toilet paper, actually, not good quality, but anyway. But that was the sort of the extent of Japan's program, was this sort of small scale chirigami kokan type of program. So that's the shipatsuten. But so starting in the 80s, cities start to have. Different cities have different regulations, but they have different collections. Put your glass here, put your paper here, put your, well, one thing that's in it is, of course, a thing called pura, plastic garbage, which now is probably in everybody's family house is the most garbage. More than namagomi is like that. And moenai gomi is not so much because you have the recycling things, but pura is actually often much larger. But starts to have this. This is from the 1980s. And we have here our friend here, he came. Let's see what let's create a sort of sound material society like this. And in other words, this idea starts to come 1980s and 1990s. Well, let's leave that there for a bit. But new categories are added. Special recycling takes place weekly. And then in 1997, the Japanese government passed the law for promotion of sorted collection and recycling. And then in the year 2000, which is now 15 years ago, they wanted Japan's Diet passed a resolution saying that Japan should become this sort of sound material cycle society. Okay. So, and the results have been fairly impressive, both in terms of the amount of, of waste that actually gets just simply sort of returned to nature or dug in here has gone way down. Most of it things get reused, recycled, and the stuff that just gets so that's been fairly successful. Okage-sama, we've all kind of participated in being part of this new. To what extent that is because we appreciate what Edo period people did or not is another question. But that's part of the whole thing. So Japan is now a fairly good example of a society that it takes good care of its garbage. But what about bicycles? So that's the first. I wanted to kind of stress the kind of history of garbage, and that and it really is this idea of recycling and kubetsu. You make sure you get it and do a very good job. That's fairly recent, even though it sounds like it's kind of Nihon Mukashi. In fact, it's something that's only in the last, say, 15, 20 years. Okay. Now, history of bicycles. It also starts with 1868. The first bicycle in Japan, it's actually not so much that one. It's a much bigger bicycle, like those Daruma ones with a big wheel. But that was in 1868. The bicycles are invented in Europe, but bicycles are not very old. The very first bicycles come in the 1830s, and they don't have any gears. They're like a strider. You just push with your feet and you kind of go forward, and you can kind of. But the type of bicycle that we know today, really, this doesn't develop until about the 1870s or so. But starting to have a big wheeled bicycle, that's from the 1860s. So when Japan begins so-called Kindaika, it's just at the same time in the West that bicycles are starting to catch on. And so it was part of Bunmei Kaika to bring bicycles to Japan. And also not only bicycles, but other wheels. Look at all these kuruma. Because in the Edo period, if you look back on, say, look like Tokaido, what is the, Hokusai's, the 53 stages of the Tokaido. You won't find any wheels. And that's Japan's main highway. There's no, in the Edo period, people didn't use wheels. There's a few ox carts. And maybe there's also a few sort of carts that are for, daihachi guruma, something kind of carrying a few things. But in fact, wheels were sort of outlawed. There were on the one, and there was even on some of them, there was taxes. But people, if you were commoners, even you commoners, you weren't supposed to even ride horses. That was a privilege for a samurai. So there's all sorts of restrictions according to your mibun, and so forth about how you can travel. It was one way the society was going to hold back, any chance of rebellion. And also the roads were no good. The roads of Tokaido was a very nice road, but when it rained, it gets muddy. And then if you have wheeled transport on a muddy road, it gets worse. It's almost impossible. So the type of roads didn't encourage it either, the type of streets. So Edo period was a sort of society that didn't use wheels. only after the Meiji Restoration, or actually from the 1860s earlier. And then there's a sort of explosion of mobility, an explosion of wheeled. The trains come, the basha come, the bicycles. But in fact, you know, jinriksha. Did you read it? Why do you think jinriksha became more popular than bicycles? You know, there was the first jinriksha in Japan. Actually, the jinriksha is a Japanese invention, made in Japan, and spreads all throughout Asia very quickly. And it was invented in 1869, 1 year after the Meiji Restoration. And in that year, a couple enterprising people, they started to have jinriksha. They went to Nihonbashi and people didn't know what it was, you know. But very quickly, the advantages of being carried were immediate, and it's cheap. People had kago, you know. You had two people, and you could carry people around, right? Have you ever ridden in a kago? Anybody? I tried it. It's not very good. You know, you get kind of cramped up. I've tried jinriksha. I went in Kyoto to Arashiyama, and I asked the jinriksha person to take me, not on the course for tourists, but take me to the station on the regular roads and go fast. It's actually pretty good, and it goes quick. And you know, so I kind of recommend jinriksha. I can see why it was good. It feels nice. You're being carried, and you're you're kind of a little bit like a little chisana osama, ne? But why do you think jinriksha exploded? Actually, before, did I have some figures about it? I think I had the numbers here. By 1872, 3 years after the new vehicle had been put into use, there were 40,000, and by 1975, 100,000 jinriksha on the streets of Tokyo. Boy, it's batsugun. And in the same period, the number of bicycles probably increased like maybe from 10 to 50, 100. ほとんど増えない. But jinriksha really took off, and people are going everywhere, and it becomes, you know, nichijou teiki. But it was only, it was only, say, within 5 years of its being, it was really quite a commonplace. And you say, oh, you know, get the kuruma to take me somewhere. It becomes part of your everyday life suddenly in the Edo period. Why is that? Did you get any reason? Why not bicycle? Yeah, you got some idea?
Women's kimono.
Kimono, that's one thing, isn't it? People's clothes, women's clothing here. Actually, yeah, you don't have to, particularly for women, but actually men too. Women, there were other reasons why women didn't ride bicycles, and actually in the West too. The riding of bicycles in the West, as well as in Japan, originally was only for men. It didn't seem proper for women to ride bicycles, and you know, you have to get on top here, and so there, and the clothing wasn't good either. So bicycles for women, it's the late 19th in the West, and it's really early 20th century in Japan that women start to ride bicycles. But the clothing issue is important because it's especially for women, and they can't ride bikes, but they can be taken on jinriksha, and it's safe. And it's cheap, because the kago needs 2 people, this only needs 1. And it's comfortable. Well, not really. This, from around the 1890s, early 20th century, it starts to have rubber wheels, pneumatic tires, Dunlap, with wheels. And then it gets really kaiteki. Here it's just a metal wheel, so it's kind of gata-gata. Okay? And also, what bicycles were expensive? It's not being produced in Japan. They're imported, and it's a type of novelty, whereas these were actually produced in Japan. Jinriksha, a big Jinriksha factory opened up in Tokyo, and it was not only selling Jinriksha to Japan, but then exporting it to China, to Southeast Asia, to India, even to Africa from Japan. A big Jinriksha, export industry. Okay? But also bicycles, you had to push yourself. You had to do it yourself. And you like riding bicycles? Good. But sometimes you sweat. If you are an Edo period gentleman, eraishito, you don't sweat. It's not good. Being carried around is good. Instead of there's status issues as well. People who had the money might use for some type of hobby or some type of sport, but for everyday transportation, it took some time. So bicycles in Japan don't really catch on until early 20th century. Bicycles were obviously good. Here's Mitsukoshi department store with its, haitatsu, send things out, delivery boys. And when the jitenji was used for posting, for post office, also for delivery service here, like Kuroneko stuff, and then also for telegrams. They deliver a telegram. So delivery service, but also for the military. The bicycle was part of, you could go places, do things. And once the bicycle starts to become part of, around this time, I can commute to work like this. I don't have to take a subway or not subway, a streetcar or walk. I can go there quickly by bicycle. But it's not until the early 20th century that bicycle as a sort of common person's mode of transportation for ordinary people starts to become possible. And even then, it's not until the 1920s that the so-called modern girl can ride a bike. This is actually 1930s here. This is 1920s. And that bike riding becomes really fashionable for women and then for children as part of, kind of mass society in the Taisho period. And so by the 1920s, the bicycle is a sort of the means of transportation of the ordinary person. In 1890, there were 10,000 bicycles. By 1910, about 400,000 bicycles. And then by 1925, 4 million bicycles. 1940, 8 million. It really, really takes off. And of course, as the bicycles take off in the early 20th century, the number of jinriksha decline. So by the 1920s, it's already well in decline. By 1930s, hotondo jinriksha nai. It's really become a switch to bicycle society. And also, bicycles were good. Can you believe this? Think of it. Where would you rather ride a bike? In Tokyo, where the streets are paved and flat, or in the countryside, where the roads are narrow, windy, not paved, and lots of mountains. Tokyo, it sounds atarimai. But in the 1920s and 30s, where most people rode bikes, was not in the city, but in the countryside, in the farming areas, and even where there's a lot of mountains. Because people in the city could take subways, could take trams, taxis, if you had some money. But in the countryside, the roads were bad, and farmers could use the bicycle to go places. Even a little struggle up the hill, down the hill, they might attach a so-called riaka, a little thing to the back of it, go to the fields, go back and forth. Bicycles were really part of the farmers, rather than, and farming tools like a nogu, rather than they were sort of a commute to school. It's a sort of different mentality. So the majority of bicycles were in the countryside before the war. Okay, bicycles are growing. And it's really only after the war that they start to get in more into the city and become really attached to women. Do you know bikes have gender? In Japan, can you see a bicycle and say, this is a woman's bike and that's a man's bike? Sugu wakaru? It's probably not so easy in Japan. But in the Western bicycles, usually in the United States, if the bar goes straight up here, it's a man's bike. If it comes down here, it's a women's bike. But Japan's bikes were very quickly unisex bicycles. And also, the bicycles become associated with women, like mamachari. You know, and take on, even though up till before the war, or say till 1945, majority of bike riders were mainly men, and just a growing number of women. After the war, women's riding of bicycles take off and becomes really the majority of people using bikes daily are more women than men. And the beginning of models here, aiming, particularly this is the smart lady, this is the so-called archetype of the mamachari bicycle, with a shopping basket, so forth, for going shopping. Then later on, we'll see the adding of seats, like here's our new mamachari from now. This one has seats, and it's actually dendo assist kana. This type of bicycle becomes really what we think of it today. Okay, bicycles have become, in Japan, bicycles are actually making Japan into a kind of jitensha okoku, maybe say, or it's kind of, Japan is one of the leading countries that has very high rates of bicycle use. Other countries in Europe, such as Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, may have, very similar, a little higher than Japan, but Japan is now has about 86 million bicycles. The population is about 126 million, so the per capita is actually quite high. And also, in terms of the, it says here, this is data from about 5 years ago. Bicycle ownership in Japan ranks 6th in the world, following the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The United States ranks 11th, China 17th. And also, not only is there a lot of people use bicycles, but have bicycles, but actually people use them too. Some 15% of all daily outings are done using bicycle, particularly. And this ranks very high in world percentage. Netherlands is at 30%, whereas the United States is 1%. So, in other words, if you're in the United States and you want to go to the corner store, and it's only about maybe it's 2 miles away to go shopping, you take a car. In Japan, most people will go by bicycle. And so, in that sense, also the fact that it's not only, when we talked about it as environmentally friendly, that it's not only that the bicycle doesn't pollute, but that more people use the bicycle on a daily basis in Japan than other places. And so that also makes a big difference. Now, bicycles were also very, did you know that after the tsunami in 2011, that bicycle sales went way up? In other words, people already had lots of bicycles and doing it. But after that, sort of the vulnerability of the transport systems, like the subways, the trains, and the roads, people found out that in living in big cities that they couldn't go anywhere unless you had a bike. And also, even in rural areas up in Fukushima, people couldn't do anything, but people who had bikes could still get around. And so there was, a big surge and increase, and even more increasing of people who commute to work by bicycle after 2011. That's probably a trend that will continue. So after March 11th, commuting rates in urban areas are up, and sales of other bikes have also sharply risen after 2011. Now, the bike, we said, was environmentally friendly. Okay? And when people think about bicycles, when you ride bicycles, one thing you say, well, bicycles are convenient. And that bendy part is quite important. Why do we ride our bikes? It's convenient. It's speedy. Sometimes speed is important too. Actually, even back in the Meiji period, people said, that speedo, and they're using the kind of the romanization, speedo. It's kind of a modern idea that people come to say, well, I really want to go place fast, and it's faster than walking, and I can get there, the most direct route, speed. Also, bicycles have the idea of, especially in the early 20th century, of independence. What's the connection between jitensha to tokuritsu? Anybody have an idea? If I was to say, does it make you feel independent? You can do it yourself. Your power. You're steering. If you're in a car, quite often you are a rider, and the car takes you. And also, you're stuck on the road. Same with a train. You can only go from this station to that station. You can't say, I want to get off here. With a bike, you're in control. You can stop, you can turn, you can get off the road. You can basically go anywhere you want. Don't do it. I mean, be careful. But you are in charge. And you're, in a sense, some people called the bicycle the freedom machine. And it was a liberation machine, especially for women. And all of a sudden, they could go places they couldn't go before. Especially when they changed their clothes and they sort of wear these sort of more rational clothing, it was called. Rational clothing movement, so you can ride the bike. And then you can go anywhere. Well, your husband doesn't have to take you. You can go by yourself. So this is these ideas of speed, convenience, independence. The bicycle was part of a whole idea about modernity, in progress, equality, individualism, democracy. These sort of things went along with bicycles. Bicycles also made you feel good. Have you ever, if you feel, sometimes people come to me and they say, oh, I'm feeling a little bit depressed. Go out and ride your bike. It'll make you feel good. Get that air coming through your hair. And go out go out to Tama River. Along the side of the Tama River, there's a bicycle course there. You can ride up, you get to see the river, you get to see the blue skies, you feel good. It actually is, it's refreshing to ride bikes. So there's some people who, there are ways in which people say promoting bicycles. But most recently, and kind of, even though we started off saying bicycles are good for the environment, this is a sort of comes fairly late in the reasons why bicycles are important, or why we should ride bicycles. The fact that it's good for the environment. Again, that idea only goes back to 60s, 70s, maybe at the beginning of the Kankyo Undo, the environment movement. Remember the very first Earth Day was in 1970 or so, right? So just around that time, bicycles are also kind of into the environment movement. And there's a sort of the attachment of bicycles to environmentalism. It's not an old idea, but fairly new. In Japan, the first, the word ecology, there was a person who coined the term bicology. And it's the term of some people who said, well, bicycles are good for the environment. 1972, a group of 21 bicycle groups established the Society for the Advancement of Bicology. That bicycles can contribute to the creation of a safe and comfortable environment. And that encouraging the connection between bicycles and the environment. But again, that's 1970s. And then later in the 1990s, some people say, well, let's have an appeal to the 2002 Johannesburg Summit on Sustainable Development, saying the bicycle will save our planet. And that idea of really linking, the future of the world to bicycles, that's just that 2002. That's, what is it now? No, only 14 years ago. So that notion that somehow bicycles are environmentally friendly is pretty recent. The bicycle, invented in the 19th century, in the 21st century now, 150 years later, has become the vehicle of environmentalism. And when you get rising CO2 levels and so forth, increasingly people are looking to the bicycle, the economically friendly bicycle. But, okay, so we've got the environmentally friendly bicycle, the green bicycle. But what about this? Kichijoji. And there's a sign here that says, 自転車などね、ここは放置自転車は禁止ですよ. And there's signs here and signs there. And all along that street, there are bicycles parked. どう思いますか? Now, the question is, we already said that Japanese people are very good at recycling and following the rules, and that they have internalized environmental ideas about garbage, right? So if that's the case, how come people are parking their bike right next to the sign that says, don't park here? 説明してください. How come? I just show you these things. Think about that. Why do people ignore that sign? Did you do it? Maybe so. If you ride to Kichijoji, it's there are bicycle parking lots, and you have to pay 100 yen. But sometimes you want to go a little, not just to there and walk. You want to, せっかく, you're riding your bicycle and it's convenient. You want to go as close as possible to where you're going, right? And you're just going to go there a little bit, so you leave it there, and come back and take it. Maybe that convenience aspect of bicycles makes you into a lawbreaker, but it overpowers your ideas about environment. I don't know. This is the Bicology ad. They're still around. Japan's the greatest bicycle country in the world. There's one bike. You don't need a license. They don't admit. It helps the environment. 日本は世界でも有数の自転車王国ですね. Wonderful. Okay, that's that. And also I said bicycles came to the rescue in the 311, where the other cars aren't going to roll. The bicycle still works. So just show you a couple images there. But now here is bicycles take up most of the road. Even look at the police car here, just allowing that. And of course, there's it's meiwaku, right? what happens if somebody kind of doesn't, maybe their sight isn't so good, they can bump into the bicycles. I put this small sign here, okay? But, again, why do people not, actually, there's sometimes maybe churinjo ga tarinai. Let's build new churinjo. Some of them are really good. The ones in Musasakai are very nice, new ones, but a little bit far from the station. And so, but, and 100 yen. But sometimes, so that's another question. So, but then often what happens is that some people don't come back and get their bike. Even they say, "Jitto dake." Something happens and they leave it 1 day, 2 days, and then the bicycle gets taken away by the police or by some truck, and then it gets put in a lot, and you get a hagaki saying, "Come get your bike." But do you go get it? Some you might go, it maybe cost you 2,000 yenぐらいかな. And some people say, it goes further and further and further. And actually, instead of going to pick up your bike, you don't get it. You just leave it there. And then it gets rusty and so forth, and gets thrown away. And what can you do with an rusty old bike that's been sitting outside for maybe a year? Nothing. It can't even be recycled. And it has to be put into, basically bury it. It's not even worth recycling. So that's the fate of many bicycles. I put down here, you can look at this later. Fortunately, the problem is starting to get solved. It's getting better over time, but this one looks here. This is Tokyo, a number of bicycles. And in the article that I asked you to read, there's more details in there as well. But basically, bicycles get just kept in this. This is where this is the lot where if you wanted to go find your bike and you pay your money, this is where you have to go. And doko ni aru kana? But and then most of these bikes don't get reclaimed; they just get left there, and then they don't get recycled either. Now, some people don't also find their bike a little bit broken and then throw it away. And if you want to throw away a broken bicycle, what do? You call up shiakusho. You tell them, you have sodai gomi, you have big gomi, and you've got to buy a seal, and it gets to pay some money, and then you have to tell them when to come. So it's kind of hard. And so many people, in fact, just achikochi shiteru. Can I show you a film here? Okay. Did you know that? All those bicycles, and don't throw your bicycle away, okay? And don't throw it in Inokashira Koen. But probably it's kind of convenient, just throw it away. Maybe at nighttime. But that's what happened. But jitensha is kind of that throwing away bicycles is almost like a symbol of throwing your garbage away. And it symbolizes, this is jitensha kogai. Kind of, it becomes almost a symbol of pollution itself. Let me just show you one more quick film. Have you all watched Sen to Chiharu no Kamikakushi? Yeah, you Spirited Away. Favorite film, right? Especially if you're environmentalism. ちょっと見せましょうかな. What's coming out? Yeah, jitensha. Okay. And it looks just like the ones out of Inokashira Koen, right? どうして? So why do people throw their garbage away? I mean, if people in their house and in the dorms are so careful with their garbage, why do people throw away bicycles? ちょっと矛盾じゃない? Anybody? Maybe you've done it yourself? Got an idea?
For example, like at convenience,
Yeah.
we can throw away garbage
Yeah.
for free. Maybe it's that kind of idea.
That's kombini だから you leave your bike there too?
Well, that's also illegal because
Yeah.
we're supposed to bring it back to our house.
Yeah, that's true. Oh yeah, you're not really supposed to use the kombini garbage. But if there's a nukimichi, you try it. Try some way to get around it. Huh? What are we going to do? But that's the issue. How to explain all of these, and you've got. I use that word mental framework. The way people think. Bicycles are good for speed, good for convenience, good for independence. And in fact, some people say, the environment, it's supposed to, bicycle is environmentally friendly, and yet, this is kind of like 10 years ago, a questionnaire about bicycle usage said, well, why do you ride bikes? And the biggest percentage say, freedom of movement. I can go everywhere I want, 66%. 61 said, speed, I can go quickly. Economy, it costs less. I can save money, I don't have to take the bus, I don't have to take a taxi. Economy, 31%. Health, it's good for my health. I feel good. It's good for my muscles, and I stay nice and thin. Health, 30%. Convenience, I can go wherever I want easily, and I can get there quickly and park right in front of the place. Convenience, 19%. Enjoyment, kaiteki. I enjoy riding a bike. It makes me feel good, 12%. And in the very last place, it's environmentally friendliness, 10%. So maybe, it's not yet, maybe people might have some idea that the bicycle is environmentally friendly, but it's still not yet part of a kind of internal, your mental framework that by riding a bike you are actually contributing to the environmental health of the society. So, and then what happens to these bicycles? Some bicycles, there's a chart, I won't go over that, but most of the bicycles get disposed of. They don't get recycled. There are certain companies, like even Musashino City, tried to send bicycles overseas, not only because people, one of the reasons is also the bicycles in Japan are pretty cheap, especially in the last 10, 15 years, and especially Chinese bicycles, or bicycles made overseas and come in, really cheap ones. 1000 yen ika kana? Can you buy a bicycle for about 8,000, 9,000? If you go to Don Quixote, there's a place. You can buy, in other words, actually my advice as a committed bicycle rider, don't buy them. It's not safe. Pay the money, get yourself a good frame that's going to, if you get in an accident, it's going to help you. In other words, be safe. Because sometimes the cheap bicycles are good for a while, but they break easily. And if you do get involved in a big accident, they won't help you at all. The frames just bend up. So, and this is quite serious. Get a good bicycle, and a quality bicycle. It doesn't have to be made in Japan, but just make sure it's a quality one. But the trouble is, most of the bikes that are being abandoned are actually cheap ones. And people say, well, instead of spending a couple of thousand yen, that bike wasn't in great shape either. I'll buy a new one. And it's not going to cost me that much. And so the value attached to those bicycles is pretty, you don't really treat it as one of your treasures. And yet these bicycles sent overseas, and then and people don't buy used bikes either. There's not such a big market for used bikes because you can buy a new one for just about the same price you might buy a used bike. But some people are sending them overseas, donations of bicycles to countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America. But they, spare tires, tubes, flat tire repairs, that's part of it. So some lucky bikes get recycled. Some lucky bikes get sent overseas. And here's our friend Echo Chari, who says, recycle shite, and we can send it and rental it, and it's an ecosystem. And they want your own bike. So if you have to get rid of your bike, call these people up, and they'll take it for you. and they'll do it. So that's another. ICU used to have a recycling system for bikes. Is there still around? もうなくなったかな? There's some signs. The ICU used to have it, but I think that's a kind of a club, but it's not using it, not anymore. So, but these people are still in business. So if you have a bike and you don't want to just throw it away and get it, call these people up. These people also come to universities and collect old bikes. So sometimes you might see a big truck come to ICU and just collect them all up. You know, they say after a couple years, and so ICU sends off a lot of these too. And Ekochari is quite active in various universities, going around picking up bikes that are abandoned. You might have used a bike for 4 years, sotsugyo suru, I just leave the bike behind. And you know, it's so narimasu yo. So but some bicycles get recycled, but most bicycles are not so lucky. They get carried away and buried in the ground somewhere as landfill, and destroyed and never to get reused or recycled again. Why do we, who are fairly kashikoi, fairly good at recycling our gomi in our household and our daily life, why do people abandon bicycles so easily? Just think about that sort of issue. The point is that bicycles which have been fairly, you know, have the potential to be environmentally friendly, to contribute to the environment, in fact, are contributing to the environment itself. It's sort of the, you know, my conclusion here is, ironically, the pollution-beating bicycle, the bicycle that should help us get rid of, to help the environment, itself is a source of pollution in Japan today. And sort of, you know, I say it's ironic. I hope in the future that we can, maybe it doesn't come like that. But, and also in my studies of looking at in Europe too, this isn't such, there is a problem of, you know, of theft and abandoned bicycle, but nothing on the scales in Japan. So why is it? See if you can answer that question. Anyway, in your comment sheets, I'd like to hear your attempt at answering that or any other thing. どうですか? We're stopping now, but I'm writing your comments. But any question I can answer? I love to ride my bicycle, but I'm a pretty safe bike. I obey the rules. So that means stopping at stoplights. Somehow, not only do bicycle riders kind of abandon bikes and park anywhere, but actually you feel like you can abandon all rules. There are actually bicycle laws against umbrellas, against ringing bells in front of ding, 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 against going through red lights. You're supposed to stop. Somehow, and then also sometimes you can ride, you're supposed to ride on the street, but when you get on the sidewalk, you're supposed to go very slow, and not because the pedestrians are using. The pedestrians, and it's only on certain sidewalks where it's marked, bicycles can come up. But you don't go on the bicycle path and then go onto the sidewalk and there's a pedestrian say, ring, 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 get out of my way. It happens so often because people, I'm in a hurry. So if you ride bicycle, use good bicycle sense and obey the rules. Okay? 大丈夫ですか?